Hello, this is Melissa Jacobs for DeBarra Spoken Word, and I'm speaking with Mr. Kieran Doyle, who will be our next special guest at DeBarra Spoken Word on the 25th of October 2022. And he's a very special guest, I think, because you're a writer, but you also have another profession. And could you say something about what you actually do? What's your day job?
Well, thanks, Mose, for that lovely introduction. I'm actually just a teacher, but be called very special for being a teacher, that's not something you hear very often. But yes, Mose, I teach English and history and some drama in the local secondary school there in Clonakilty. So that's my daytime job, I suppose. And because I've an interest in history, I've sort of in the last years anyway, I've got a little bit deeper into it. Did a bit more study, and with this decade of centenaries that was gripping, I suppose, the nation, got me thinking about a lot of things. So I got into writing bits about it and writing some local history. So fortunately for me, I've been able to publish a couple of books in the last few years as well. So that's been of great interest to me.
Could you, I don't know if you want to name the titles, but you're very welcome to, because I remember did you start off with a book about Bandon? Is that correct?
Yeah, I did a book about Bandon because I suppose in the decade of centenaries, it's all about the War of Independence and the 1916 rising, about Irish nationalism. And of course, Bandon on the doorstep of Clonakilty, the heart of West Cork, or the gateway to West Cork, Bandon, has a very different history. For a long time, but it's been called Orange Bandon or Derry of the South. Or when I was a little kid, we'd be driving through it. My dad would, mischievously say, Bandon where even the pigs are Protestant, and that was kind of a catchphrase, and we would laugh and giggle at that, of course, thinking, how could pigs be Protestant or any religion for that matter, But of course, it was a symbol of just how Protestant Bandon was. But to drive through it or pass through it, it just looks like any other Irish town. So this sort of intrigued me. And when I came to live in West Cork, this whole area of let's call it the Protestant history or Unionist history of Bandon, I felt there was a lot to tell. And maybe being an outsider, not from Bandon and not from West Cork.
Where are you from originally?
The city, Cork City. Nothing glorious, I'm afraid. So as an outsider, I thought I'd give it a go because I felt that, I didn't come down in any particular camp, and historians' first goal is to try to be as objective as you can, even though, of course, they always talk about your own conscious or subconscious biases coming to things, but you try to. And I think there was a deep story that needed to be told about how the communities got on together, or sometimes didn't, and what happened to the strong Protestant and Unionist character of Bandon. And it was a fascinating tale, lots to learn, lots to research. And I think it just was something a little bit different than perhaps all the, let's call it hagiographical histories of our kind of sainted IRA members or War of Independence members. I just wanted to do something a little bit different because I think in West Cork, they love a good old, it's very hard to be critical of their heroes. So I kind of steered away from that and went for the, went for a look at the orange history of Bandon, let's say.
And how was it received, by the way? Did people comment on it?
Yeah, I must say no. I mean, I say praise is no praise, but people did say that there was a story to be told, and certainly that was good. That maybe that I finally got out there in print. Anyway, let's just say it was touched on by other people in the past. I mean, I would acknowledge that as a historian, you're all the time building on what other people have written and said, and you're just trying to add the next interpretation and block onto that. I do have to say that, but it was received well from both sides, let's say. I did hear people from the Protestant community saying thank you. This was a story that had to be told, and I did hear people that say from the other side say they thought it was balanced, which was good. This is what a historian wants to hear.
Yeah.
So I was happy enough with it, I must say.
Yeah. And just to point out that there are not just Protestant people in Bandon. That's the whole story, isn't it? That there's two sides.
Absolutely, absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
And sure, I suppose a lot, thankfully, has happened in Ireland over the last 100 years. Wounds have healed and people have changed attitude, and maybe religion is less important, but identity is always important. It just changes shape, shifts a little bit.
Yeah.
And identity was what marked two communities out very much back in the day. But yeah, it's a good history. It's an interesting history. Yeah.
And what other books have you written so far?
Well, again, as I said, because the decade of centenary is such an all-encompassing topic at the moment, even we're coming to end it with the Civil War, I was kind of intrigued by all the Civil War monuments, the War of Independence monuments, the World War I monuments that are on the sides of roads or in parks or hidden in ditches. And I felt that there was a story to be told, what they said about us and about commemoration. And then realizing the project was massive, I roped a friend of mine in called Alan O'Rourke, who's a superb map maker and fantastic at categorizing. So he was a great man to have on board. So we came up with the book Monuments to Our Past, which looked at the public commemoration from the 1914 to 23 period. So it's quite a niche period, but it's the most commemorated period in Cork, probably in Ireland if you went through the other counties too. So that's fascinating.
Okay, does your talk, or are you going to read from the book, or are you going to talk about monuments?
Yeah, so I'm delighted to be invited by you guys, and the spoken word is at the heart of your own group and your own lecture series. So the Monuments to Our Past isn't just looking at monuments. It isn't just looking at the history of them. It's actually looking at the language of them. So what I want to do for you guys is I want to focus on the language, particularly on the Civil War monuments, because here we are now in the middle of the 100-year anniversary of the Civil War. And only recently there, we've commemorated Michael Collins in August. Done tastefully, quite a family affair actually. But a lot of the Civil War monuments, the language is very interesting to interpret. Some of it is quite euphemistic. A lot of it is blatant. And I think for a group of people like yourselves, poets and writers who are interested in words and language, I think you might be interested in hearing what I have to say about the words and language on these monuments, particularly the Civil War monuments, and what they were trying to say to the public and say to the people who were there to remember what had happened. Okay. So I think that's going to be the thrust of the lecture.
And from your experience, is Clonakilty exceptional in terms of paying attention to history? Is it?
Yeah, Clonakilty is fascinating, all right, but I wouldn't say it's exceptional, to be honest. I mean, a lot of the time it's down to a particular historical society who decides to commemorate it. But there's certainly different eras about it, because if you go to the Bandon area, and I mentioned earlier in the earlier book how it's synonymous with Orange, Bandon, Derry of the South, it had that name, that tag. But after the War of Independence, a lot of these monuments are found everywhere. Particularly the War of Independence one. It's almost kind of like a greening of Bandon, a kind of rebranding of Bandon, saying, you know what, this may have been deemed Orange Bandon, but here we are, a very nationalist, proud community. And I don't mean the word nationalism in any derogatory sense. I'm merely using it kind of as a label, particularly back then, where people would have identified. And it's particularly like, obviously Michael Collins is synonymous down here, but if you go other parts of the county, he doesn't exist. If you go to Thomas Kent, he's all over East Cork, but he doesn't exist down in West Cork. Thomas Kent of the 1916 Rising. So, particular areas, tip a hat to particular people. And I mean, in the talk, I'll give a little talk about that. I'll talk a little briefly as well about the lack of women. I mean, I think there's only about 1.5% of all the 360, 70 monuments that we covered. There's about 1.5% of them that are to women. Women alone. Sometimes women's organizations are mentioned along men's organization, but women actually named with their own ornament, tiny. That's beginning to change, because some of those monuments that I referred to there are all recent ones. So there's loads of stories to be told. Okay. World War I monuments, of course, 20, 30 years ago, you couldn't have them. now you're beginning to see those as well, because society has changed and people are more accepting of our more pluralist outlook in life as well.
Okay, and do you feel that we are or can learn from the past?
Well, yeah, certainly, because you take how things are commemorated now. I mean, 1916 one was a great one when it came across in Dublin. Now, some of the diehards are saying, what about those people who died and such a thing? It was very much a family affair, carnival affair. All sides were invited to the table. So you had people whose brothers and sisters and mums and dads might have died as civilians, who might have fought, even people who fought on the British side. It was very inclusive because, we have to remember that Ireland wasn't just a society that had just kind of Irish Catholics. There was, as I keep referring to, the Orange, the Unionist, even Irish men and women who were in the British forces are employed over in Britain. There's always that tie to Britain we have. So it's not, you can't cleanly define people one way or the other. So the monuments tell this tale. I mean, the best probably example is in Glasnevin, where after on the anniversary of 1916 and 2016, they had a memorial to all those who died in 1916, which was kind of controversial. So you had the Irish rebels, of course, you had civilians, but you also had British soldiers and policemen who died that day. So that was a great testimony to how we've matured as a nation. But then it has been vandalized 3 times since. So there are people out there who disagree with that type of commemoration.
Yeah. Why is identity so important? Not just to the Irish, but in general, it's a human thing to be really. Is it wanting to belong to a group? Be protected by it? You think is that part of it? What is it?
Yeah, I think it is. I think identity comes out strongest when it's threatened. Like you even take modern times now in Northern Ireland, people are rattling the cage. Should we have a United Ireland border poll? It's spooking the Unionist peoples up there. They're fearful of losing their identity, their Unionist identity with Britain, their connection to that sense of Britishness they have. So you can see them digging in, refusing to go back to a dissolved government up in Northern Ireland, etc. So when people feel threatened, identity always gets stronger. People go abroad. I mean, St. Paddy's Day is a lot more fun outside of Ireland than it is in Ireland. It's a lot more celebrated outside of Ireland because people are proud of being Irish abroad. So yeah, certainly when identity is important to us, and that comes out very strongly in the Monuments book, the book about who we are and what we were and why we died. But also what I wanted maybe touch on as well is people who are forgotten. You see, this is probably the problem with Irish history, and it's a lot of people don't want to acknowledge this. A lot of civilians died at the hands of the British, but they also died at the hand of the Irish, sometimes in friendly fire, sometimes with accidents, sometimes deliberately. And we have very few civilians marked by these public memorials, because in some way to acknowledge their death is to acknowledge what happened to them and maybe take the halo from some of the Irish volunteers, the IRA. And again, maybe it's being the outsider coming down to West Cork, where I don't have any family affiliation or particular ties or lean one way or the other, that I can maybe come at these things. But I do find that it can be quite raw, controversial if you do try to push that door open a little bit. But look, that's what I like about history. Isn't it meant to create debate and a little bit of talk and a little bit of controversy? So if it didn't, wouldn't be that interesting. Yeah. So that's what I hope to intend to do with the talk as well.
Well, thank you very much, and great, and I'm looking forward to your talk on the 25th of October.
Thank you. And always lovely.
Thank you very much.